everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button for me if you would. There's a PayPal button in the details for anybody who wants to share some love. And the StreamYard link is down there for anybody who wants to join the panel. We got John with us again tonight. How you doing, John?
Doing good, Keith.
Good. Always good to hear.
Enjoying a nice spring day up here.
Yeah, we've been having some nicer weather, but we got some rain here tonight, so we'll see how that goes. Of course, we've had green grass here in the middle of Iowa for a couple of weeks now, so it's been a strange spring.
Is that the state that Chuck Grassley is from?
Correct.
Pretty interesting last name.
Yes. Might have to dig into it sometime. If you guys remember, last night we ended up on the symbolic logic section, and the last part of it was talking about how it denies traditional logic in certain aspects. So we're going to continue on from that point. And it goes on to say, we're on page 22 now, so we got 12 more pages to go, so probably about another 3 more parts tonight and 2 more. It says logic is deeply related to moral and ethical changes in both thought and practice. All previous societies had a strong, nearly universal, and rarely questioned consensus about at least some basic aspects of natural moral law, about what was natural and what was unnatural. We seem to be having a problem with that today. There may not have been a greater obedience to this law, but there was a much greater knowledge of it or agreement about it. Today, especially in the realm of sex, by far the most radically changed area of human life in both belief and practice. I'll absolutely agree with that. Like I just said, things are changing today as we see with this transgender and all this other shit, and it should be an eye-opener for you. If you have any real thoughts on morals yourself and really contemplate that and get philosophical about it, it should cause you to pause, let's say at the least. Our more advanced minds find the old language about unnatural acts not only politically incorrect, but literally incomprehensible, because they no longer accept the legitimacy of the very question of nature of a thing. This is, again, the problem with the transgender thing. They literally deny the very question of the nature of there's only two. Just because in practice you want to make it 3, 4, 594 doesn't mean that's how it works. That's a faulty logic based on the fact that you're denying the nature of things. Issues like homosexuality, contraception, masturbation, pedophilia, incest, divorce, adultery, abortion, and even bestiality are increasingly debated in other terms than the nature of sexuality or the nature of femininity and masculinity, because now we're getting down into people's feelers, and that's not logic. That's totally separate from logic. And if you want to base your life on feelers, you're going to find yourself in a little bit of a trouble. It doesn't work that way. That's why these people have a higher suicide rate. They go through these changes and then find out that's not really what they wanted, because it tends to make it worse or something. Whatever goes through their mind. If you're in your feelers, the solution is logic. Get back to the nature of the things that you're getting feelers about. It is not an unthinkable suspicion that one of the most powerful forces driving the new logic is more social than philosophical and more sexual than logical. And I'll agree absolutely once again. People are not using their logic and philosophical concepts in thought processes because we've been indoctrinated in this public education system in a popularity contest perpetrated by sex and social activities. Symbolic logic naturally fosters utilitarian ethics, which is essentially an ethic of consequences, not a reward system, but an ethics of consequences. Things may have rewards and things may have consequences. Depends on what it is, who's doing it, when, what, why, and how, and this and that. So it's much more philosophical and I'll even say theological and theosophical in the aspect of thoughts rather than just remembering to some social programming. The fundamental principle of utilitarianism is that an act is good if its probable consequences result in the greatest happiness for this greatest number of people. It is an if-then ethics of calculating consequences, essentially. The end justifies the means, though that formula is somewhat ambiguous. It's so ambiguous, like I said, it's a computer programming, if then go to, and it's involved in everything in life. That's how ambiguous everything in life operates on an if then go to. Symbolic logic fits this perfectly because it is essentially an if then logic, a calculation of logical consequences. Its basic unit is the proposition P or Q, and its basic judgment is if P, then Q. In contrast, that's what I was saying earlier in the computer program, if A equals this, then B. It's the same concept. In contrast, Aristotelian logic naturally fosters a natural law ethic, an ethic of universal principles based on the nature of things, especially the nature of man. This is where we get into the aspect of in modern times with the police and animal catchers and animals in the streets, or even your own pets at home if the police come knocking on your door. These police are indoctrinated into operating in a commercial fashion to do certain things, and one of those is to deny the nature of the dog. And if he fears and gets in his feelers, it doesn't matter if it's a little toy chihuahua. He might shoot the little thing. It says Aristotelian natural law ethic, an ethic of universal principles based on the nature of things, especially the nature of man. For we're the ones that use this specific logic and philosophies and all that. For its basic unit is the term, a subject, S, or a predicate, P, within a proposition, and its basic judgment is all S is P, a statement of universal truth about the nature of S and P. So it's equating the similarities of things that are actually patently observable that can't be objectively denied once somebody else observes it. The very nature of reason itself is understood. This is the problem with the transgender. They're denying it when it's patently observable, always has. And just because now in modern times you want to decide in your feelers that you want to make a choice that's out of the realm of logic and create something in your mind that never manifests in reality, that's a false logic. The very nature of reason itself is understood differently by the new symbolic logic than it was by the traditional Aristotelian logic. Reason used to mean essentially all that distinguishes man from the beasts, including intuition, understanding, wisdom, moral, conscience, and aesthetic appreciation, as well as calculation. Reason now usually means only the last of those powers. That is why many thinkers today, who seem at first quite sane in other ways, may actually believe that there is no fundamental difference between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. This is why I keep telling people, I don't care what you think about this artificial intelligence. It cannot survive on its own without man. It will just sit there with its information and not have anything to do with it unless somebody puts something into it. It's called an input system.
Yeah, Keith, all logical systems need constant flow of input.
Yeah,
things don't stay the same. Almost nothing does. Humans don't. Computers don't.
Yeah, absolutely. And to portray that AI can take over mankind and wipe mankind out and then live on in existence, no, it's impossible. They are not adaptive. They are not creative. They do not have the imagination. They can only observe, and that is an input. On that observance, if there's no instruction with it, there's nothing they can do.
Right.
Greetings, Iman. How you doing tonight?
All is well, brother. All is well. The question that I have, when you talked about it, you said input and output. Am I correct?
Yeah, the machines can't do any kind of output unless they have an input.
Okay, so that would mean I remember in computer language at one time they used to say garbage in, garbage out, huh?
Absolutely, and that's what we have with this government. Like I said, if you think that we have a strong nation with the average reading comprehension of the American people at seventh or eighth grade, then I think you might be confused. You can't possibly have a strong nation if the populace is dumb.
And I guess that's where they also came up with the concept or the functions of importing and exporting through commerce. Am I correct?
Yep. That's their logic system. In order to import something, it must first be exported. It's the same thing. In order for them to do anything on their side, they first have to have an input. Absolutely.
So basically, within these courts, when they warehouse someone and they gather information, that would be the exporting of information, and then when they put it into their electronic device, that would be the importing of information that becomes part of um their financial system to generate um negotiable
Yeah.
instruments. Is that not so?
Yeah, that's that personal information, and it's called personage. Go ahead, John.
This could be why governments funded computers and
Absolutely.
actually created computers starting in the 40s, at least the modern electronic version of them, because it's
the
their
TI.
type of
Yeah,
type of system.
Yeah, the TI instruments, Texas Instruments, the little calculators and stuff that came out first were just simple calculators. But then them calculators started getting fancier and fancier, and then they created the Osborne.
Yep, and it's their type of system. It's
Yep.
a dumb idea, and I don't mean that sarcastically. It's a logical description, and it doesn't rely on intelligence. It relies just on dumb processing.
Yeah, and that brings up a thing. I did a review of my videos today. Went through the list of my videos I've done, and I'm going to do a review on Dummy Corporation, you big dummy corporation. So be watching for that after we do this series here. I'm going to do a review on your big dummy corporation and how everybody's acting as the dummy corporation when the dummy corporation is the Social Security Administration.
So,
So
Keith, then that a typographical error or a mistake, that would be what they consider the negotiable instrument or paper, the commercial paper.
that's what I consider the mistake, yeah, because it's not negotiable. The word is already set. It's as set. That's the asset, the word. That's why I say coin your words, your purse your lips. If you're reading these documents and you see something wrong, then you need to fix it. If you read these documents and you don't see something wrong, you need to fix you. Because there's something wrong with every one of those documents. I'll guarantee it. There's a conversion. There's a mix of languages. There's people that are writing these documents up that don't understand English and how it works. There's people that are putting these documents out for somebody else that wrote them up for, like, say, a credit collector, and it says clearly on it, this is an offer. Great, I don't accept your offer. It's that simple in contract world. You have to come back to me with a better offer. You know, like, why don't you bring forth the documentary evidence of the underlying obligation that says that you're asking me to pay you for something that I don't owe you at all. You're being a third party intervener, and by me paying you, it doesn't discharge the debt. See, even if if that creditor, quote creditor, says they charged off that debt, that doesn't settle the debt. That doesn't discharge the debt. The debt is still there, and that's why they sell it off to somebody else to see if they can try to collect. But that still doesn't mean that that's the settlement of the debt, because if you turn around and you did it through installment payments to this guy and didn't correct that you were in fact the true creditor, then you're going to do the same thing with this guy when you start making payments to him. See, the underlying obligation isn't even yours. It was swapped. You're not supposed to be taking on an obligation. You're not qualified.
Exactly. So they went through what is called a bait and switch process.
Correct.
Yes, and then now it really makes sense. It kind of drives it home for me right now, as you mentioned that as the offer, because like a lot of these credit card institutions, when they send out these enticements or advertisements, it's always some kind of a flashy logo or a headline or something to catch your attention, and it always mentions the word an offer is being presented to you. And then they
Yep.
give you an expiration date to participate in. Between those dates, you can accept or deny these offers.
Correct. And that's all contract. Every last bit of it. It has nothing to do with trust yet. Not until you express your part in the trust. I'll be right back, folks. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so as we continue on, it goes on to say, natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. In other words, you are nothing but a computer plus an ape. See, and I say that backwards. I would say you are nothing but an ape plus a computer. Computer is the creation of man, and again, it's dependent upon man in that sense. It can't, AI itself cannot subsist by itself.
That's why governments like computers. They need data.
Yeah. Yeah, that input is what they're expecting to keep them alive. They expect the output on their end so they can do a job. And that's what they're charging you for, is to keep track of what you're saying. Can't you keep track of it yourself? Well, yeah, but do you know what you're saying yourself? No. Greetings, JG. How you doing tonight?
Good. How you been, Wiz?
Good, good. Just going over some Socratic logic still. Got about tonight and maybe two more sessions, but hopefully we'll get through it. Dealing with logic in society is kind of rough today, as we were talking earlier with the transgender and everything. People denying the nature of things and therefore thinking they have in their feelers some kind of logical pattern of explaining why things are they are when they aren't. There aren't 594 genders. There's two. You know, it's been observed throughout history and time. There's no other creature that has more than two genders. There are some that only have one. They're called amorphic or whatever. But to think that you can expand beyond nature itself and create something that just can't exist is a fallacy in logic to begin with. And usually it's done through emotions. And that's why I get sick of people getting in their emotions and feelers. It's really stupid.
Well, people want to live in an illusion.
Yeah, that comfort and convenience, that dream world, that prince and fairy, or prince and princess, you know, the fairy tale. Kiss a frog and he becomes a prince. What kind of logic and reason are you using? And why are you trying to instill that into our children? See, those are fairy tales for children. And they're instilling false idiocy as if though it's reasonable in logic to think that you're going to grow up a prince and you're going to meet your princess someday. No, you have to work for those kind of things. So it goes on to say, Aristotelian logic is not exact enough for the nominalist mathematical logic, and is too exact for the pop psychology subjective to New Age mystic. This is where we're getting into these New Age people that are building on these social platforms as if though they've got some kind of intellect because they've got some kind of degrees. But then they are also agreeing with the transgender platform and this far right wing and far left wing, and that's just so far out of balance. And the way I see that is, if you're on a balance beam and you want to come to a true balance, you come to the center of the beam and you do it. 1 foot on one side of the beam, one foot on the other. But people have become so dependent upon everybody else and their beliefs that we end up with a situation where the balance beam has people on this side, people on this side, and they're just teeter-tottering far right and far left. There's actually nothing balancing in the middle because nobody's got any self-control. Out at sea, there between Scylla and Charybdis, it reveals by contrast the double tragedy of modern thought in its alienation between form and matter, structure and content, validity and meaning. That's why I say if you think there's more than two genders, you would have to prove a validity to explain the meaning of a third gender. It's a matter of thought process to come to a realization. If it can't come to a realization, then it's false logic. This alienated mind was described memorably by C.S. Lewis. The two hemispheres of my brain stood in sharpest contrast. On the one hand, a glib and shallow rationalism. On the other, a many-island sea of myth and poetry. Nearly all that I loved, I believed subjective. Nearly all that was real, I thought grim and meaningless. In contrast, it's the other way around. All that you love really is kind of grim and meaningless, whereas objectively is what's important. This isn't to say that at some point in time, somebody gets this crazy idea that they think that there's a greater populace that truly believes there are transgenders, or you can be a woman when you're not, when you were born a man, or you can be a man when you were born a woman. No, I don't think so. That's so inherently observable that there couldn't be a possible false objective view like that. Not in my mind. You would have to show me clear and concise evidence. Neither mathematical logic nor experience can heal this gap, but Aristotelian logic can. I don't know. It says it can. I don't know if it has. Like I said, we have these massive amount of people that do believe there's transgender going. Transgender is a realistic concept, and I don't think so.
They've been fooled.
They have. It is thoughts, soul and body together, yet not confused. Mathematical logic alone is abstract and angelistic, and sense experience and feeling alone is concrete and animalistic. But Aristotelian logic is a human instrument for human beings. And that's because it's a matter of using a philosophy in those objective observances throughout history and time. Animals don't do that. They don't have a history. They don't have a memory of storytelling like we do. So we've been able to develop through a communication network of cave paintings and symbols and hieroglyphs and various different languages, a concept of repetition over time that says objectively, this is so, and we don't have to observe it objectively except in those writings. This is the fallacy of history. The history is written by the victor. The victor isn't always the one that's right. It's just the strongest one. That's why they say it's the strong survive. Survival of the fittest. No. I think we're coming upon an age where the survival is going to be of the most mentally capable. Those that are going to be able to quickly change and adapt to quickly changing environments and stuff. Aristotelian logic is also easier, simpler, and therefore time-saving. For example, in a logic text misleadingly entitled Practical Reasoning in Natural Language, the author takes 6 full pages of symbolic logic to analyze a simple syllogism from Plato's Republic that proves that justice is not rightly defined as telling the truth and paying back what is owed, because returning a weapon to a madman is not justice, but is telling the truth and paying back what is owed. Another single syllogism of Hume's takes 8 pages to analyze. So what he's pointing out here is that some people have this analytical line or a mind like a lawyer that has to use long extrapolated language to get to a clear, concise point that's already there. Understand it's already there. Like it said earlier in the reading, in the first 2 sessions, we have an inherent logic already programmed into us that we act upon naturally already. This is the problem with the public education system. I believe it intercepts that. And that's what prevents us from growing up in our spiritual, natural sense of knowing who and what we are already. And we get enamored with this popularity contest and the social and social system and the rewards. And I think that's a big problem. Christmas is a perfect example of it. I have found that students who are well trained in Aristotelian language are much better at arguing and at understanding arguments than students who are trained only in symbolic language. They're the ones that use that mathematical process for putting the symbols in order to be able to create a language in order to understand logic. Again, dismissing the natural or traditional logic that's already inherent. For Aristotelian logic is a logic of the 4 most basic verbal communication arts: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. It is the logic of Socrates. If you want to be a Socrates, this is the logic you should begin with. The old logic is like the old classic movies, strong on substance rather than sophistication. The new logic is like typically modern movies, strong on special effects, but weak on substance. See, this is the new logic we're talking about with the transgender and this new generation coming up. This is bullshit. And you have to understand it was an older generation that taught them. So it's been seeping in. It's just been getting bigger and bigger. Now it's at a large enough extent that a large portion of the population objectively is seeing it, and it's not working out too well for them, either side.
But Keith, substance, it's too hard for me, man. I don't want substance. It's too much to comprehend. It's too difficult, man. I want special effects. I want bullshit.
Well, yeah, most people want to feel like they're floating around on cloud nine and stuff, and that's fine. But in reality, you have to have substance to put your foot down, and that's truly what we're talking about. It's time to put your foot down, people. I have found that the old logic is like old classic movies, This new logic is typically more like a modern movie, strong on special effects but weak on substance, strong on the technological bells and whistles but weak on the human side. But logic should be a human instrument. Logic was made for man, not man for logic. And I don't know if I can agree with that. I can say that man has a logical mind, has a logical process, can follow that logical process, but I think other animals follow a logic process too. You know, they have some kind of intuitive programming that tells them what to do next. Otherwise, bears wouldn't hibernate, things like that. The problem of material implication is the next section. The problem of material implication. The following issue is quite abstract and difficult, though I shall try to make it as simple as possible. It is included because I believe it shows that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, at the very heart of the new logic. Logic is most especially about reasoning and inference, the process of thinking by which we draw conclusions from evidence, moving from one proposition to another. Again, that transgender stuff, you can move from one proposition to another, but if you fail to realize the aspect that that's the largest suicide rate and they're doing it for specific reasons that I think would be better taken care of at a younger age by being honest with them instead of letting them try to live their life in a bullshit dream of being something they're not. The proposition we begin with is called a premise, and the proposition we move to or infer or reason to is called a conclusion. The simplest and most straightforward kind of reasoning is to move from a true premise to a true conclusion. Therefore, if my child is born and he's got a little tiny penis, he's going to grow up someday and I'm going to hope he's going to have a great big penis. I'm certainly not going to help him be interested in any way of cutting it off or not using it appropriately. He is a boy. He will grow to be a man, not a woman. Pure and simple. But we can also use false propositions in good reasoning. Since a false conclusion cannot be logically proved from true premises, we can know that if the conclusion is false, then one of the premises must be false in a logically valid argument. That person has breasts. It's a false proposition if you're acting like a woman when you're a man. Even if you look like a woman to me making that proposition is a false proposition if you've had breast implants or hormone treatment and I take you as a woman. You're lying to the world and you're lying to yourself. This is why it's so inherently important to understand what's happening, folks. You're going to end up lying and not even knowing it because the rest of the world is lying to you and you've been so willing to accept it. Yeah, my little boy can grow up to be a man. Yeah, my little boy can grow up to be a woman. He gets to decide what he gets to grow up to be. That's not the kind of choices we're supposed to be allowing. That's insanity. A logically valid argument. Go ahead.
Nah, I'm too late. Keep going.
A logically valid argument is one in which the conclusion necessarily follows from its premise. In a logically valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. In an invalid argument, this is not so. All men are mortal, and Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal is a valid argument. Dogs have 4 legs, and Lassie has 4 legs. Therefore, Lassie is a dog is not a valid argument. Might seem confusing there, but the language is specific. The conclusion, Lassie is a dog, may be true, but has not been proved by the argument. It does not follow the premises. I'll read that again. Dogs have 4 legs, and Lassie has 4 legs. Therefore, Lassie is a dog. You can't make that conclusion. Even though in this instance, Lassie is a dog, you can't make that conclusion based on the 2 statements. Now, if it said dogs have 4 legs and Lassie has a dog, then you could say Lassie has 4 legs. Language is important. Now, in Aristotelian logic, a true conclusion logically follows from, or is proved by, or is implied by, or is validly inferred from only some premises and not others. The above argument about Lassie is not a valid argument according to Aristotelian logic. Its premises do not prove its conclusion, and common sense or our innate logical sense agrees. However, modern symbolic logic disagrees. And that's because they're saying that we already know Lassie is a dog from movies and stuff. Therefore, information that is not included in the statement can still be predicate. Can still be predicate, but that would still be a presumption, because they may very well be talking about somebody else named Lassie, another creature named Lassie. It's never brought up. So for me, that is a flawed logic. You can't symbolically just presume. That's the problem with this new age shit of symbolic logic. You can't use the language in your form and say, therefore, because there's language that's not included that I do know, I can infer that and therefore it's true. No, it's got to be objectively true to be true. This is why I tell people, your truth is not my truth. My truth is not your truth. There are things that are objectively true to everybody that we have to admit. But in our own experiences, neither of us can know the other's truth. Common sense. However, modern symbolic logic disagrees. One of its principles is that if a statement is true, then that statement is implied by any statement whatever. Since it is true that Lassie is a dog, dogs have 4 legs, implies that Lassie is a dog. Again, it goes to the context of the conversation. And again, if the person saying that Lassie has 4 legs is speaking of a different Lassie, then your premise or your assumption that there is a premise there, a predicate there already, is false. It's your predicate, not the intended predicate. In fact, dogs do not have 4 legs also implies that Lassie is a dog. False. Again, that's determined on the fact that you're presuming that you know Lassie is a dog already because Lassie was a dog. Yeah, I'll agree, Lassie was a dog, but again, the context, if the person that's speaking isn't talking about the dog, but actually a horse that they named Lassie, then your predicate symbolic logic is false. Even false statements, even statements that are self-contradictory, like grass is not grass, validly imply any true conclusion in symbolic logic. You see the insanity? Symbolic logic in that says the grass is not green. And that's because we do know that there are some people that are colorblind, and to them, grass is a shade of gray, or grass is actually blue, or something other than green. You can't use that symbolic language to make profound statements like the grass is not green unless you are the one that's colorblind. And a second strange principle is that if a statement is false, then it implies any statement whatever. Dogs do not have four legs implies that Lassie is a dog, and also that Lassie is not a dog, and that 2 plus 2 are 4, and that 2 plus 2 are not 4. You see the problem with symbolic language? It's a contradiction itself. The principle is often called the paradox of material implication. Ironically, imperial implication means exactly the opposite of what it seems to mean. In other words, by material implication, we have to take the predicate, which is brought on by a predecessor. Material is the predecessor. The predicate is that it's an implication. It's only an implication. It's intangible. It's not real yet. However, we follow up, it might be. But at this point in time, it remains an implication. Therefore, it's not real. It's not material. Okay? It means that the matter or content of a statement is totally irrelevant to its logically implying or being implied by other statements. So saying Lassie has four legs has a material implication to the people that know that, yeah, there's a dog that's named Lassie. Therefore, Lassie's a dog. In that particular situation, yes, that's true. But you can't unequivocally say, because of that statement, you can conclude, just like anybody else can, that all dogs, or that Lassie is a dog. Because not everybody else may know that Lassie was a dog. And even if they did, they may still be talking about something else differently named Lassie, like a horse, a rabbit, cat. Common sense says that Lassie being a dog or not being a dog has nothing to do with 2 plus 2 being 4 or not being 4. But that Lassie being a collie and collies being dogs does have something to do with Lassie being a dog. Again, implying that Lassie is a collie. Maybe Lassie wasn't a collie. Maybe Lassie was a Clydesdale. Again, like I said, a horse. If the information isn't there, you can't come and state ultimately that to be true. You have to have the foundational element of what the person stating it means and is referencing. That's the inference. But not in the new logic, which departs from common sense here by totally sundering the rules for logic implication from the matter or content or the propositions involved. And see, with this transgender stuff, even that doesn't follow symbolic logic. Again, you can't just automatically grow up to be a woman if you were born a boy. You have to go through certain scientific and medical processes that will alter things that you can't do on your own. It's not natural. There has to be a material alteration.
It's faulty.
Correct. Thus, the paradox ought to be called the paradox of non-material implication. In other words, telling you that it's not going to come true. You know, these guys growing up having their shit cut off and tucked up inside them, they have to open it up every so often and keep it stretched. They literally have to spend the rest of their lives fucking themselves. And that you would think would be satisfying enough, even if they didn't get somebody else to fuck them afterwards. It's insanity. Logician. So, class, you see, if you begin with a false premise, anything follows. Student. I just can't understand that. Logician. Are you sure you don't understand that? Or student. If I understand that, I'm a monkey's uncle. My point exactly, says the logician, as he snickers. What's so funny, says the student. You just can't understand that. So why are we all trying to understand what isn't understandable? Why are we trying to understand transgender when it's not understandable? Do you get the paradox there? They're trying to force the symbolic logic on the mass population because it works for them. And it's only because the people are willing to let those lies ride. Evil doesn't happen unless if it weren't for good men that refuse to do anything about it. We have to learn when to stand up against the insanity and put it down. Even if it is your own son wanting to grow up, be a woman. You have to train him up in the ways of the Lord and let him know what comes natural. All this popularity and trying to keep up with Joneses, that's not realism. That's material implication. And you can have certain things that you've seen other people have in those material implications. But when it comes to the reality and the nature of things, you have to recognize that so you can make that true. Otherwise, no matter what you try to get from those material implications, it'll never be true. Never. Goes on to say the relationship between a premise and a conclusion is called implication. And the process of reasoning from the premise to the conclusion is called inference. In symbolic language, the relation of implication is called a truth functional connective. A truth functional connective, which means that the only factor that makes the inference valid or invalid, the only thing that makes it true or false, to say that the premise or premises validly imply the conclusion, is not at all dependent on the content of matter of any of those propositions, but only whether the premise or premises are true or false, and whether the conclusion is true or false. So again, even in symbolic language, when it comes to the transgender, you can believe it to be true yourself if you went through it. But it can never be true to me or anybody else because we haven't had that experience. That's where the symbolic logic falls apart. When you start making these things part of your reality and then placate subjectively that it applies objectively, that's the false premise. It doesn't apply objectively.
So, brother, isn't a premise something to do with an assumption or a presumption? Am I correct, or can you elaborate on that?
Right. A premise is the same thing as a promise. One is for the future, one is for the past. Premise, premise, and promise. So promise and premise are basically the same predicate, which is MIs. One is pro and one is pre, like male and female, married and unmarried. It's the same thing. So when we look at MIs literally means bet. So you have a prior bet or a future bet. The prior bet is the implication, as it said here, implication. And then the conclusion, if you win this hand, you're going to bet. And if you win this hand, the stakes say it's 3-1, and you're betting 50, you're going to get 200 back. And that's the conclusion. It's all about betting. Every last bit of it.
But it sounds like a deposit, because isn't a deposit has to do with a future
Yeah, you're moving something from here to here. It's a deposition.
a deep right.
In symbolic logic, the relation of implication is called truth functional connective, which means the only factor that makes the inference valid or invalid, the only thing that makes it true or false, to say that the premise or premises validly imply the conclusion is not at all dependent on the content or matter of any of those propositions, but only on whether the premise or premises are true or false, and whether the conclusion is true or false. So if the premise is true, then there's got to be something connected to it to make a conclusion to be true also. There's got to be. They're trying to dismiss it. In their own symbolic logic, they're trying to dismiss part of a logic path to get from implication and to conclusion. That's the insanity. That last paragraph was cruelly abstract. Let's try to be a little more specific. So I've got 4 points we'll go over, and then we'll be done for the night. It says if the premise,
brother.
Go ahead.
Quick question. Then would an implication or inference be like a supplication of something?
No, an inference is just a connection of what will happen if something is done. Supplication is like a addition to something. Says if the premise or premises, let's just say the premise for short, are true and the conclusion is true, then the if-then proposition summarizing the implication is true. That's why you can't do without it. If P is true and Q is true, then if P, then Q is true. It's important in the language and how the paths follow each other, particularly in computer programming, and this is same with the English language. It's basically like a computer programmer. You're literally able to use your language to program other people to manifest things for you or with you. That's why it's so important to understand this stuff. I see that, Kevin. Yeah, they never stay for long. I don't even have to really worry about chewing them out. So, if grass is green, then Mars is red is true. That's literally what they're saying, symbolic language. There's no connection. You have to have the in-between to connect them to make the conclusion. If there's nothing there, then you don't have logic. You don't have a order of things. There's something that's out of order. It's missing. That's why I say that's the problem with this public record. There's things that are missing, things that weren't said when you were born. Goes on to say, if the premise is true and the conclusion is false, then the if-then proposition summarizing the implication is false. If P is true and Q is false, then if P, then Q is false. So if grass is green, then Mars is not red is false. Still doesn't make sense, does it? I don't see any of the symbolic logic making sense because of that one element. They try to deny things that have to be there in order to make a final conclusion. Otherwise, your conclusion may not be true, and therefore it's only probable. This is why we talked about probability earlier. See, logic doesn't say things are true, but if you're going to say things are true using a logic, then you have to prove them true. If the premise is false, go ahead, sister.
So then, Keith, in an inference, it seems like it would be some type of a mathematical formulation where there would be a type of rule in the equation where it would have to equal um, um, it would have to equal something, bring it into a wholeness of some kind of a total, some kind of a wholeness somewhere. You know what where I'm
Right, and
going with
that's why I
this?
say with symbolic language, they have this tendency to deny things, like I said earlier, when it comes to traditional logic or the nature of things, and you can't do that in a logic path. A logic path literally is a matter of putting things in order, and if you have something missing, then there's something that's out of order. Doesn't mean everything else is out of order. They might still be in order, but you see a missing element, then there's something out of order. It's like a blockchain. There's got to have a chain of title.
Okay, so that would be like some type of a propositional logic. Would that be correct?
Right. I would agree there. Then it says, if the premise is false and the conclusion is true, then the if-then proposition summarizing the implication is true. If P is false and Q is true, then if P, then Q is true. If grass is purple, then Mars is red is true. See, again, it doesn't fill in the missing elements, and therefore it's only what Iman described as a propositional logic. Fourth, says if the premise is false and the conclusion is false, then the if-then proposition summarizing the implication is true. If P is false and Q is false, then if P, then Q is true. So if grass is purple, then Mars is purple is also true. Now what I want to point out here is the very distinct thing that I correlate this to is the decimal. So on one side of the decimal point, you've got a 1. You multiply that 1 times 1, you get 1. You multiply that 1 times 10, you get 10. If you move that decimal and you put a 0 here and you put that 1 there, and you put another 0 there and another 1 there, and you multiply that times, 10, 1, 0, 1, 0 times, so 10 times 10, now you get 100. It moved it over. Okay? Same thing on the other side of the decimal point. So you have 1 penny. If you take 1 penny times 1 penny, logic says you have 1 penny. On the other side of the decimal, whereas if you take the 1 0 and then the decimal 0 0 times 1 0 decimal 0 0, you get 100. It moved it over this way. Guess what it does to that penny? Now it represents the penny on the decimal side as 0.01 times 0.01. If you take a penny by it times a penny in the decimal system, it no longer equals a penny, does it? Now it equals 1/100th of a cent. Remember, 0.1 is not 1 penny. That's 10 cents. So when you move the 1 over 1 decimal, now you have 0.1. Everything flips. And you have 10 cents times 10 cents equals 10 cents. not 100. Do you think your mathematical system is screwing you somehow because you don't know how to use reason and logic in a monetary system? I urge you to think about it again, folks. And with that, we're at the end of our stream. You guys got anything to say on the way out? I certainly appreciate you coming up, that's for sure. Anybody?
I'm good, Brother Keith. I'm really good. Like I said, I appreciate, and in fact, I think we missed Brother Russell tonight, didn't we?
Yeah, he's down there.
Oh,
we just
okay.
saw him down in chat. John dropped off earlier. I don't know if he
Okay.
loses signal or what, but
Well, like I said, all blessings to the Most High and to the information that you bring. It's always enlightening, and I thank you. I yield.
absolutely all glory goes to him. How about you, JG?
I just read up on the word infer. I'm not a fan of the word infer. Just thought
Yeah.
I'd let you guys know that. Reason is the proper exercise of mind. So this whole trans shit, a lot of shit we're seeing is the faulty exercise of mind. Intentionally pushed on us, mind control.
Absolutely. And again, it's why I talk about the public education so much. I truly believe that's the hindrance of mankind, and that if we really want to ascend in our own, our own hearts and minds and pass that on to our younger generations, then I think we need to look again at how we're handing over the teaching of our younger generations to people then that are then just doing their job in a dogmatic system that perpetrates all this bullshit. I think we need to use our practical logic much better.
Yeah, we're at a time where people just want to play games. They just want to toy with your mind. They want to fuck with you. They want, they want to get a laugh out of it. They want control. It's just,
Well, it was mentioned earlier on one of the
psychotic, and it's just crazy how psychotic shit is,
Yeah, well, it was mentioned earlier on a stream I was watching that people actually they enjoy the drama, and I've said that many times. People come on here, and I noticed it right away. People enjoy the drama. They do not want an education, though that's what this device is so extraordinarily recognizable for, is the greatest library of all of history, and people don't want to use it to learn like we should. They want to use it to learn how to do their little graphics and stuff so they can make little parodies of everybody else's drama. And that's sick. And they get that from the news sources too. You see news sources doing this stuff. That's the political cartoons and stuff, been going on for centuries. Now it's invading the rest of the population through that dogmatic system of politics.
Well, Keith, isn't that how they utilize the religion in these churches? Because now these churches is all a performance base, and they go in and it's all theatrical and drama, and the people go in and they get entertained and they go home and they keep doing the same bullshit that they been, just go get a little.
Part of the indoctrination is the church.
Right. And to me, that's like I'm going to church to get me a little high. And then when I get high, I'm in the church, I'm in the high, then I can go home and then I can relax.
Yep. All right. Well, with that, again, I want to thank everybody for your support. Please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Thanks for coming up tonight, guys. And you know me, I love you, and I don't give a rat's ass whether you love me back. And that's say I don't care if you hate me, I don't care if you don't respect me. And that's on
bullshit.
You. So may God bless you, and have a good night, everybody. Thanks again.